Welcome to The Real with Ross. Today we're sitting down with Pastor Frank Harris. He's the pastor of Second Canaan Baptist Church, Detroit, Michigan. He is an excellent preacher, has been preaching for a while, and has traveled the length and breadth of this country. Today we're sitting down talking about ministry from childhood to adulthood, what it means to live as a PK and how you survive in the world of church, going through all of the different seasons from starting as a young person till now. Welcome.
Drew, let me say thanks, man, for the opportunity to share. I know so many have sat in this seat whom I am unworthy to tie their shoelaces. But thanks, man, for the opportunity to share.
I appreciate you, man.
Indeed.
And he preached for us yesterday and killed, so he consented to stay over later today to record with us today. So just tell us a little bit about your journey. How'd you get started?
Well, so first, fifth generation preacher in my family. Started preaching at the age of 11. Actually started accepting preaching invitations at the age of 7. So from 7 to about 11, I'll go back. At 5, my dad had a plethora of guys and women, male and female, I should say, who were announcing their call to the ministry. And I was always attracted to that whole preaching, going home, imitating things that I saw and heard. And so when I saw these different individuals making these announcements about being called in the ministry at 5, I says, "Hey, Dad, explain to me what they're doing." He explained it to me. I said, "Well, I'm a preacher. I'm gonna do mine next week." But that was just me again in the being enamored with my dad as a kid. And he says, "No, I need you to understand what this is first. Now this may be something for your life, but I need you to understand that this is a calling that goes beyond me and you. That in the event that God does call you in the ministry, you're gonna have to do this with me not being present." So this is at 5. So at 7, individuals started calling me to do Children's Day, Youth Day, speaking at, children events. So from 7 to 11, I'm going here and there. Excuse me. I'm going here and there, preaching, speaking, unofficial. No announcement has been made.
Okay.
No acceptance officially in front of the congregation as we have done in the past. So about, I'm 11, and so my dad has this conversation with me months prior to when I'm really wrestling with this. He says, "Now listen, a few years ago, you told me that you were possibly called to ministry, and that was at a young age. We talked about it, I explained it to you." It's like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, now you've been around here bootlegging. Like what is this?" He says, "And I don't want to keep allowing the moment for you to just be bootleg. And if this is a call, then at some point you need to be." So man, I had that conversation. This is at 11. I hear this conversation, it goes. And for about 2 months, man, I'm wrestling with, even as a kid, we've all been through this, regardless to the age. But I'm wrestling, 11 years old, unable to sleep at night. I don't have any bills to pay. I don't, no stress at that time. Man, I'm wrestling, and I'm hearing that this is the assignment. This is what I'm calling you to do. And the funny thing is, I didn't tell my dad first. I went and told my mom. Like, "Mom, the Lord just won't leave me alone. So I just don't feel, I'm 11. Something don't feel right." But I know I'm being called into this assignment, man. And so it's funny, I was going to speak at one of my dad's friends' church on Father's Day. 11 years old, I'm going to speak at his church on Father's Day. But I wanted to get back to my church, my home church, where my dad is my pastor, and I wanted to get back and make that announcement on Father's Day. And Father's Day, 11 years old, I get up and make this announcement to the church. And man, here I am, 26 years later in preaching, and man, God's been kind.
Yeah.
He's been kind, and yeah, that's how it started. And it's funny, man. I don't always tell that story. You know, you don't get a chance to, especially after you've been doing it for a few days.
Yeah.
It's not a story you go back into time and remember. But now I'm just kind of replaying it. But yeah.
So what was the journey like at that age going into ministry? I mean, you got a lot of big opportunities.
Yeah.
Way before most people your age. I mean, even thinking at 12 years old, you're preaching late night
Right.
for the National Baptist Convention. And maybe on another podcast at another time, we can talk about early introductions to just not only the preacher circle for engagements, but also the preacher circle of being a child around adults in an adult world.
Right.
How did that shape up for you in that age?
Man, what I would say is, and I've said this in times past to individuals, and I still feel it now, it pushed me into an early stage of responsibility. That in some ways, as I've gotten older, man, in some ways, I've had to look back and admit that while my parents did not rob me of childhood, I feel like because I was put in spaces early, that in some ways it did rob me of childhood. You know what I'm saying? My parents gave me all the, I was able to enjoy all the things that kids enjoy. You know, I was attracted to the release of the Jordan 1s, the Jordan 2s. My mom was at the store while I'm at school, right? But being put in those spaces at an early age, it caused maturity to happen early as it relates to how I viewed things. The things I heard,
Right.
You know what I'm saying, being in those rooms. Now, granted, you alike, we've sat in rooms and we knew how to, I think our group of individuals who grew up around the older guys sitting in the room, we knew what it meant to be in the room and listen. We knew what it meant to be in the room and be quiet. Don't speak until spoken to. But being in those spaces, man, I think it really, for me, I feel it now that it made the clock speed up.
Okay.
As to being a child and, having to mature quicker.
And what kind of pressure did you feel in that environment in that time?
So individuals always allowed me to be me, but I still knew there was some line of demarcation where I still had to be the leader in the space, right? Never forget, man, I was in middle school. During that 11 initial call to preach, official first sermon, from 11 to 15, and it was just a quick time. Things were happening quick. Traveling, my summers were filled with traveling across the country preaching, right? And so doing that, it pushed me into some things, and just being able to do those moments, knowing that I'm still a kid though, there was still pressure.
Yeah.
There was still some pressure, man, because I was in middle school and the newspaper in Memphis did an article on me. Now, the whole summer from 11 to 15, I was going to different places, South Carolina, North Carolina. Washington Post came over to South Carolina and did an article on me. And then my newspaper in my city, in Memphis, where I grew up in, they did an article. And it was just so much pressure, man, because in middle school, they came to my school right? I'm in here doing work,
Right.
and they are doing these observations. They're following me around for maybe like 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow.
Right? They're at my school following me around. They're asking my friends about me. You know, then when I'm going to preach in different areas, they're popping up, building their observation or building the report that they're writing. So man, all of that was just, it was pressure. It pushed you into responsibility, and it pushed me into what I know the space I'm in now. So being so privatized in things, because it was a high level of, responsibility that was pressed on me. And by God's grace, man, I had friends in school who knew I was a preacher, but they still allowed me to be an individual. You know what I'm saying? Then being a PK, I think we have always, as PKs, we have always had the pressure of living in glass houses, right? So a lot of stuff, as funny as it may sound, a lot of stuff, we couldn't do then because we didn't want to ruin, PK, that's pastor's son did that and not wanting to ruin that. But then a lot of stuff that I didn't do as a child, I'm now having to bump into it as an adult. Yeah.
So you had one layer of pressure. You're now a young preacher. You had a previous layer, which is already existing, of pressure, which is you the pastor's son.
Right.
How do you navigate both of those pressures at 12 years old? I mean, you haven't even experienced life yet, but you're having to now navigate, I'm Pastor Harris's son, and I'm also called to preach and preaching. What has the journey been like as a PK at that point?
Again, glass house. On top of individuals not really respecting that you have been now called, and so they always still, people remain looking at you as, again, the kid that they saw at 3 and 4 walking around the church. So now you're a preacher. It was, for lack of better terms, for some people it was just a cute thing. Right. Even when I was even before being called into ministry, man, I was when we would do Easter speeches and all of that, parents didn't want their kids to be on the stage with me, because for me, I was going to preach my speech, right? So people just kind of looked at it as it was a cute thing. But you're already under the pressures being, PK, now you're preaching. So you're just trying to balance what that looks like. But then again, as a kid, it's a hard season of balance. But not just the grace of God, but the blessing of being reared in a home where I started preaching with a father who's my pastor and who's present. You know what I'm saying? And so those moments helped me balance. My dad, I had a love for basketball. I played middle school basketball on the team. I played AAU basketball. I played for the church basketball team. So my dad always gave me those opportunities for balance. Hey, you can play basketball, you can play on the team, whatever the case may be. But then you also have to be able to make the decision for when it's time to go preach and you got a game on the same day. Like which one you're gonna choose, So just trying to navigate through that, man, and making the balance to that was the thing. But here I am, Drew, just listening to the questions. Man, it was just God's grace, man.
Yeah. And then, so you start pastoring at 19?
I pastored my first church at 19.
Okay.
I was in my first year of college in Memphis. I didn't leave home for school. I went to Crichton College. Crichton College in days past was a Bible college. But by the time I had a chance to go, it was university.
Okay.
And I'm in the first semester. And this group of individuals have been following me around for like 4 or 5 months. I'm talking about there was no area in Memphis or even outside of Memphis that they didn't pop up in. Now, granted, during that time, we didn't have social media like we got it now. We wasn't putting flyers out like we do now, advertising moments. But these people, man, they were clocking in on where I was at. I'm like, man, this is strange. Who are these people? Probably about the 15th service that they had come to, right? They finally come talk to me and tell me who they were. It's funny, at this time I'm 19, but I had preached at their church when I was like 15.
Okay. So
Right?
they had a background of you.
They had a background of me. It was, the faces were not faces that I remembered during that time. So they had a background on me, man, and they says, hey, you've preached for us when you was about 15 for our youth day. And right now we are in the transition for, looking for a new pastor. And we want to know if you would consider, just putting in for the assignment. It was shocking to me. It's funny. At about 17, I was preaching at Pleasant Green. Pleasant Green is the church where the late Dr. E.L. McKinney pastored. And his church was also in transition. Okay. They were looking for a pastor. And one of the senior statesmen in our city was trying to push me then into, hey, if you want to start pastoring now, to know anything about Memphis, the senior statesmen, they were the movers and shakers. Okay. They were always a part of pastoral processes.
Okay.
That if you had a great level of respect and relationship with them, if you said you wanted to do something, they were able to make that sign off, right? And so at that time, preaching at this church, it wasn't something I didn't feel as ready. But when these individuals, Mount Pisgah, Olive Branch, Mississippi, it's the place, they call it the high place now, where Daryl Pettis pastors.
Okay.
Daryl Pettis sings quartet and choir, community choir and all of that. That's where he's in. And Pettis has actually been there since I've been gone. But I went there at 19. Again, I've already had a life that has put me into these big spaces of responsibility in rooms that others wouldn't fathom me being in that time. So 19, I go, I preach, and I'm feeling that nudge of getting my feet wet. Pray about it. The Lord release us to go ahead and put information in. And I go there, man. When I went, it was probably about 35, 40 people left in that church. I was there 2.5 years. In those 2.5 years, we had grown to about 300 people.
Wow, that's tremendous.
And again, it was a big moment of responsibility. Even here I am now, backtracking with finishing education, because starting the pastoral journey at 19, while being in my first year of college, it was just a lot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so at that time, I pulled away from that journey.
Okay.
To try to give some attention to, again, 19. This is a church that was actually in Olive Branch, Mississippi. It's a growing area even to this day, right? And so just trying to understand this, like, God, you've put me in this thing is speeding up fast, right?
Do you feel like they put pressure on you that you could not stay in school, or do you think the assignment just took all of your concentration to the point where you felt like you needed to give that attention and not create the balance?
Yeah, they didn't put the pressure on me. That was a decision I made.
Okay.
You know, first time. And I would also say, in transparency, you know, it was a church that got me. It was training ground, right? And so trying to balance, you know, sitting in meetings as the youngest person in the room and trying to garner that respect that I am the pastor in here. Yeah, I needed to put all of my focus on that. Needless to say, as I stated, it was training ground. Yeah.
Now, you went there unmarried. Were you unmarried the whole time you were there?
The whole time.
Okay.
Yep.
And then how did you get to your second church? So how'd that transition look?
So, pastored there 2.5 years, Mount Pisgah Olive Branch. When I'm single, things are great for me. When I leave there, I go back to my home church, back with my dad, back serving, you know, there with him. It's during that time, man, my dad is having this conversation. We're having these conversations about him. You know, the thought was strong at the time for him to slide over. I would be more senior pastor, that process. So what during that time, man, Dad would get up on Sundays and just say, man, I ain't going to church, right?
Okay.
Because he knew I had developed some time pastoring. The funny thing is, my first church that I pastored was Mount Pisgah. My home church, where my dad pastors in Memphis, the name of it is Mount Pisgah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I go back with Dad. So I'm there with Dad for about a year. Just, you know, working, assisting him, you know, doing everything he's assigning me to do.
So you left with a succession in mind. You left Mount Pisgah to go back home to Mount Pisgah with a succession in mind?
But no, that was not the thing. I just went back. When I left there, I just went back saying, you know, I'm coming back just to serve.
Okay.
But Dad just that's when my dad started wanting to put that in place.
Okay. Now, if I'm not digging too much, what created the moment at Mount Pisgah and Olive Branch that made you feel like it was time to leave, especially considering the fact you went in with 45 to 50 members and now you're at 300 and something? What gave you the thought to walk away?
So we had several different things. Everybody knows something about Baptist church and polity and all of that and those various things that take place. And I was fighting against people who had been in control years before me.
Okay.
Right? And those things just never changed. Regardless to how the church grew, the people loved me, but they also had a lot of, they were indebted to the people who ran things, you know. This one individual, you sleep with the angels now, but we were just always, it was just always a combative thing, right? So we're just kind of dealing with that. Everything that I attempted to do by way of vision for the church, it was always something pulling at it. And the people just never would really speak up. You know what I'm saying? Then one of the biggest things, we went through a moment too where financially we needed to make some changes. And the request was for me to be the person to make the changes as relates to you take the cuts, but then we're going to increase the music department's pay.
Oh, wow.
And so all of that just started
Okay.
being a spiral of things.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask you another question, and if anything we talk about doesn't work, I'll cut it.
Yeah.
Do you think that their initial interest in you at that age was that they were looking for a young person who could preach but wouldn't want to meddle with the business?
Wholeheartedly.
Okay.
Wholeheartedly. I think it was a place where we want somebody that'll bring the vibrant move back to the space, but he would just be concerned about wanting to preach. And the thing for me was, which was also the walk away, and I was clear on this. I was released, in praying about it, and it's true. Whatever you loose on earth, it'll be loosed in heaven.
Right.
And I was clear about that, because my thing was having a place to preach every week was not the excitement for me, because I was already doing this.
Yeah.
And that's no arrogant way of saying that, but God had positioned my ministry from 11 to now 19 with them. I was preaching somewhere every Sunday. Right? And so that wasn't, if my thing is, you've called me, granted, you all voted, God did the placing, but you wanted me as your pastor. And if I'm the pastor, then that means I ought to be
Right, be the pastor.
Be the pastor, right? And but wholeheartedly, it was a thing of, this person is going to bring, all that we've lost. He's going to bring that back.
Yeah, but don't touch the business.
But don't touch anything.
Yeah. So you leave, you go back home, you're serving with your dad, just doing the work. How does the second appointment or opportunity come?
So with the second appointment, man, I'm now ready to get back out there, but I'm also saying my start over, I want it to be away from home.
Okay.
Right? Which was a great thing for me to start a journey absent of parents being around, family being around, and I've never put myself out there or stretched myself in too many different places. Some individuals, when there's an open space for churches, resumes be everywhere, right? I only put a resume at that time in two different spaces, and New Jerusalem in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Anybody knows about Arkansas, especially Pine Bluff. I didn't know that much about it, but I just felt like, God, if my start over, I would want it to be somewhere where I can go and start a fresh journey and build a name in a place where I'm totally unknown, right? And so I put resume in there, and these individuals this church had 160 resumes that they had received.
That's a lot.
E.L. Thomas from the Sunday School Publishing Board, his father was the longest tenured pastor there, Curly Thomas. So I put a resume in, and Marvin Wiley, who pastors the Rock of Ages in Maywood, Illinois, was from Pine Bluff. He's from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So he knew some people there. And he was helping them through their process, just answering questions if they needed it. And he asked them, he says, did you all receive a resume yet from a young guy, Frank Harris? He was like, no, we hadn't received anything yet. So days go by, they receive it. He says, all I want y'all to do is just hear him. He says, just hear him, right? So they called me to come and preach. I preached, and I was just like, I don't know about this, right? Now, when they did call me to preach, to come and preach for them, they called me to come and preach on Easter Sunday.
Wow. Oh yeah.
So that was their
huge,
big, that was their big Sunday. So I go, I preach, but I'm just like, I don't know. It was an older church. Nothing is wrong with any of this, but it was older church. They robed up every week. They got their notebooks open. They 3-ring binder. They got their songs in it. You know, they're singing, and I'm just like, you know, the people in it were meaningful people in Pine Bluff. You know, state trooper, individual professors at the college, and also these were, you know, well-to-do individuals. But I was just like, I don't know about this God. So man, I'm riding back home. It's about 2 hours, 3 hours from Memphis. I'm going back. I'm just like, God, whatever you say. If this is, so some time go by, they don't call me for a while, so now I'm nervous. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that looks like, what this, you know. They finally called back. They wanted me to come and preach again. And after preaching that time, they said, well, we want you to also come and do a Bible class when you come back the next time, right? So I was like, okay. So I go, I do that, stay over, do a Bible class, and then they say, well, can you stay over till the next day so that we could talk to you? So we talk, we go through all of that. So I'm just, you know, I'm still processing this whole thing. And I'm feeling the tug because, again, my prayers, whenever I've made a request for something, I've also made sure I put a commitment to it as well. That God, if this is what you wanted me to do, I know what I asked you for as well. So I'm not going to close the door, because I believe that we don't have the right to close any doors that he opens. Because there's going to come a time that if we close a door that he did open, we're going to want him to open a door, and he's not. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so I went into that, man. I prayed, felt that release. And so then I go there. In going there, I'm now engaged. I'm engaged to be married.
Okay.
And so this is I start there August of 2010. August 2010, first Sunday, I start there. I'm engaged. I'm scheduled to be married in October of the same year.
Okay, so short period of time.
Short period. So I'm there by myself, maybe about 2 months, just kind of getting my feet wet, getting the journey started, and then bring my wife into it. I'm there for 5.5 years. Once again, another place that was on a decline. You know, they had about 75 people. We on roll had gotten it up to about 425.
Okay.
Within that 5-year time. But you know, a lot of that was, and I'm able to embrace those moments, and you got to, you know, be able to say that a lot of that was excitement of people joining. It was something fresh to the city. Pine Bluff is really a place, if you live there at a young age and you go off somewhere else, you come back to Pine Bluff now to retire, okay. Right? So I'm something new to the city. University of Arkansas Pine Bluff is 7 minutes away from the church. And so every year, every semester, we had college students, right? Funny thing though, these were college students who had heard me across the country in the places that they lived in, Milwaukee, or Chicago, or, you know, Dallas, or any, you know, people who've heard me. Now they've come there for school. They got their own transportation. So they're like, that dude preached at our church when he was, you know. So that was the thing for us, that every semester we were taking in college students. And so we were making the strides. But again, this was a place that says, young guy is going to bring some, you know, some energy back to our place. But we don't really want a lot of changes.
Don't touch our stuff.
Yeah, yeah. We don't really want a lot of changes. Now, do what you're gonna do, but don't mess with this over here. You know, so the gradual moments of trying to change, enhance worship, trying to enhance the building, things of that sort, it was just like, so finally navigated through some moments. I was able to do some things, renovated the sanctuary, you know, did some repairs, bought some buildings, bought land, with the thought of, you know, this is the vision. We want to, you know, we buying all the land around us, you know, bought a new van, you know, just different things, enhancing it because we wanted to use the van to be able to pick up students and all of that. So was able to do those things, left some plans on the table for some other moments of expansion at the church and all that. But after doing that big overhaul, and I don't equate being able to put new paint, carpet, change pulpit, all that type of stuff, put a new roof. I don't really equate that to pastoring. This is just something that needs to be done anyway. You know what I'm saying? This is that doesn't mean they giving you the ring to pastor.
Right.
Putting a new roof on the building, that's our responsibility anyway, or else we won't be in here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, but just some of those other things. But it was after those big moments of buying land and all of that, securing things for the church's future. It was a moment where I felt that I wanted more for them than they wanted for their church as a whole.
Okay. Yeah. Now let me ask you a more personal question. Newly married, going into that environment and dealing with some of the same challenges of the first church, which is I'm the young guy, I'm here to stabilize and build, grow membership, don't touch the monuments that are here, don't try to make too many decisions. You the young kid here among all these adults sit over there. How do you navigate, or how did you navigate rather, the new marriage and the challenges of pastoring all at the same time in your, early mid-20s?
21. So I got married at 21. So yeah, so I'm 21, 22.
Right.
So again, because life has always put me in the lane of responsibility and having to take care of some things and people, right? At this time, again, this is the second church. So now I'm trying to adjust to marriage, knowing now that I'm not just thinking for one person. I'm not just moving for one person, while also being sensitive to what the needs of the church is at this time. And I'm also at this juncture, at that particular moment, I'm saying, now you got to buckle down, because now you got somebody else to be responsible for. Things were, you know, tumultuous at times at that assignment, but you just can't just get up and walk off this time. Excuse me. It's not that easy.
Right.
Because now, when you don't have anywhere to go,
right,
now you're taking your you know, new wife and what will your movements be, right? And so now I'm just trying to balance that while still juggling being an itinerant preacher.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a little more stuck than you were in the first church.
I'm a little bit, yeah.
And you're outside of the city where you grew up.
Yeah.
You don't have your safety net there.
Right.
You got to figure all that out. Now, on a personal note, I know that your wife is also a PK.
Correct.
So it's much easier, I would think, for her to navigate those church environments because she's aware of the circumstances kind of growing up like that. Before we talk about Third Church, I want to know, how do you and your wife, as two PKs, navigate parenting, knowing now what it means for both of you all to be a PK, and how your children may not have some of the same experiences that you all had as PKs, or how you shield them differently because of your experience there?
Well, my wife is better with it than I am. Because, and man, and I'm transparent in this thought, because my summers and spring breaks and Christmas breaks, I spent my days preaching. You know what I'm saying? The summer for me was preaching. I didn't get a chance to do a lot of the, theme parks and all of that, because I'm out here preaching. But that's what I enjoyed. That was my calling. And so my wife has been better on making sure that my children, my daughter is 10, my son is 7. And so she's been on the track of making sure that they enjoy those moments, and we let them be kids. You know what I'm saying? And my children are, they are well-mannered kids. They're disciplined kids, and so they know, even when they're at church, be a kid, but you still know that people are looking at you for those, pastors' kids. And so we allow them to be free. Because my thing is, one of the things when we found out my wife was pregnant with my son, people automatically says, "Oh, you got your preacher." No, no, that's not what I'm forcing on him. You know what I'm saying? I want him to be able to develop his own person and be led to do whatever he wants to do. Now, if the Lord arrests him to do this, then that's between him and God. It won't be.
It won't be that Frank did.
No, it won't be the pressure for me. Even in naming him, I changed the whole. I'm a junior, so I changed the whole trajectory on that because my thing was I don't want him to feel the pressure of people saying, "Oh, well, he got to do such and such," or who knows what the future holds. And somebody who probably didn't like me or currently has some alt with me, will hold my kids back from something. And so, no, we let them be, children.
Good, yeah. And I think that you'll probably, definitely, you both understand it more than anybody else. As a preacher, as a pastor, I hear the stories, but I've never experienced it. Right. But you all get a chance to really change the trajectory for your kids on what it looked like that maybe didn't happen with you or with that generation of, first generation PKs. Right. The second generation PKs get a little differently. So you have your first child in Pine Bluff?
In Pine Bluff.
Okay. Yeah. What's the transition like to Detroit?
So the transition to Detroit, funny thing is, I have been preaching in Detroit for maybe since teenage years. But I have been preaching in Detroit for my wife's dad.
Okay.
Right? So I have been preaching for him for years. And, so that's the other thing. When we go to Arkansas, this is her first time away from home. And so it's just us. All we know is us. You know what I'm saying? So that helped build the marriage during that time. So when this Detroit move comes up, again, I know it's time for me to move from Arkansas. As I did moving into Pine Bluff, I put a resume out at 2 different churches. That's for whatever reason. That's been my, it was one in Michigan and one in Ohio, right? And it's crazy, man, because God had really opened both doors.
Okay.
I'm talking about both doors, that everything that I did at one, I was doing it at the other. So each time I preached at both of them, both churches twice. I go here one Sunday, and the other one had already scheduled me for the next. It was just a crazy time. So I'm dealing with this. So we're trying to make this next move, and my current church ends up speeding up their process, right? And my prayer was, God, whichever one moves first, I believe that's where you are calling my ministry to be president. And once again, it moved. So now we're going back to Detroit. So my wife is like, oh, okay. She didn't have a problem with it. But it was also something that I never expected that Detroit would end up being home. So we make the transition to Detroit. Bigger church as it relates to building, bigger congregation, and so just making those transitions in the first year of being at my current church, in the first year, man, 260 people joined. Wow. In the first year.
Wow. Yeah. Expansive. Yeah, that's expansive.
In the first year, I'm talking about, and we have paperwork to prove it.
Yeah. That's somebody's whole congregation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So this thing is moving fast. So man, we were able to make that transition, and I think too, sometimes not to be overly spiritual, but I think it was a move of God too, because during that time there were several people in my wife's family who were sick, transitioned, but she had a chance to be there, be around them. Her mom has battled some sicknesses, what have you. So she's, I think all of that had its place in that transition back to Detroit.
Yeah. So what has the journey been like in Detroit? I mean, by the time you go to Detroit, you're mid-20s.
Right.
You pastored 3 churches. You're a different kind of person.
Yeah.
You're not looking for a church that's trying to sit you off to the side, to be the young kid, grow my church, don't touch my monuments.
Right.
So how did you walk into that differently than you did the first 2 assignments?
Funny thing about this church is the first time I preached, as we mentioned it in the opening, the first time I preached in late night at 12, the founder of my current place that I pastor, that was the last Congress he attended.
Wow, okay.
The funny thing is, he has his delegates who are there from Second Canaan, and he's telling them, we have to go to church tonight because they said it's this little boy that's preaching.
Wow.
So all of them come to late night, Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm 12 years old preaching late night. And the providence of God brings us back together that I'm now their pastor.
Jeez.
Right?
Wow. So setting you up at 12 and late night for that assignment in Detroit, 10 years or so later? Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Right? So I walk into this and they now know that we don't have somebody who is doing this for the first time. And God has been gracious in this journey that I feel that I have been able to be the pastor. Right? They went 3 years without a pastor.
Okay.
And so to walk in, the funny thing about this is I'm still going through this time before leaving Arkansas. I'm knowing it's time to make a move. And it was one of those things where, I was making changes because we said it the other night when we were talking, that I have the fear of starting over, right? So I'm making these changes. So when I send my information to them, though, it's funny, they were in the end of the process.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So again, the grace of God, I got in, it was, was able to be heard, whatever the case may be. But man, I feel like I have been in the seat of pastor. It has not been a moment of where following my leadership has been in question. It was a thing of just merging people to love one another. And so that's what this has been. I mean, and it's been a great 9 years, And again, I say to them so often that they have a better me than the last 2 places got. Because again, I'm a more disciplined me. I know what won't work.
Yeah.
Ain't no need in trying that again.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I know what not to say.
Right.
You know, ain't no need in trying that again.
Yeah.
And two, I've learned more of being a pastor to people.
Yeah.
It's way beyond just preaching every week. You know, but being a pastor and being present when people need you to be present.
Yeah. So let's round out the end of this with the education piece. So you said in your first church you stepped away from education. In your last church, you stepped back in to education. So, you know, how did you get back to that being a priority? What journey took you into the place where you say, look, in my first church, I decided, you know, I needed to be present pastor, and in a young age couldn't really do that and balance that. In this third assignment, you said, I need to step up and do the education piece.
So even in the second church,
Okay.
I had those processes where I'm filling out paperwork, getting ready to start again. And right when I get ready to start again, my wife is pregnant with my daughter. So pastoring, still juggling the role, now walking into fatherhood, still ain't a good time, right? You know, so like it's still not a good time. So when I get to the current place of assignment where I'm assigned to currently, I get here, I do a certificate program because I'm saying to myself, this has to be a part of my journey. And it's more so, it's personal. You know, some people would think, well, man, you've already walked in some, you know, spaces, you've sat at some tables, you've preached in some places. I mean, what's you've gotten churches without it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
What's the purpose?
What's the purpose?
Right.
The purpose is, man, it's personal. And that's what it was for me. I wanted to intentionally be disciplined to say that I earned this. I received a completion. You know what I'm saying? All of my friends have pushed and constantly said, Frank, you got this, but just get this, right? You know, George Parks, Philip Pointer, Terry Mackey, you know, Charles Goodman, man, we've all been friends for years, right? And they've all just pushed and said, man, you can do it. You know, I had a conversation, man. It's funny, when I was leaving Arkansas, Dr. William Curtis and Dr. Maurice Watson were in the city preaching. They were preaching in Little Rock. Dr. Curtis, I think, was preaching for Parks at the time when Parks was at New Hope. Dr. Watson was preaching for someone. And we went out to dinner, and that conversation of school hit again. And you know, Dr. Curtis and Dr. Watson, when they get on a conversation, they are on the conversation, right? And man, just that conversation, and Dr. Watson even stated during that time, he says, man, you still got time. I think at that time, Dr. Watson had just finished his doctorate, I believe. He was about early 50s or so at that time. So he's like, man, you got time. He says, all I want is I don't want you to have all of these gifts and graces and be lazy. Right. And so, man, that pushed me. And again, it was always me saying, I don't think there's ever the right time, because there's going to always be something.
Right.
But, and I've been telling individuals that even now, man, you won't ever have the right time. You just have to make time. And that's what I ended up doing, Drew. I ended up making time for me to make that accomplishment because it was personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's personal.
Yeah. So you finished the certificate, then you went to Virginia Union?
Virginia Union.
Okay.
Yep.
And so how did you navigate the school experience at our beloved alma mater?
Yes, sir. Man, it was great. Now, you know, I was telling the guy the other day who's now in, I regret and miss the fact that I didn't spend or didn't get those privileges that you all had as it relates to being on the campus.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I became a student during the pandemic. But it was also a great moment because it built discipline. It built discipline to the fact that when the road and the world did open back up, I was on my way out.
Yeah.
You know, so
And
I was
you could
able
also
to
take
navigate
class from wherever you were.
And I was able to take class from wherever. And I tell individuals, I think that was just a blessing that opportunity is available there for a school of that caliber. And you still get a chance to experience the stories of others sitting at the feet of a Dean Kenny and, you know, Boykin Sanders and those type of shit, and still get those moments. Although you're not in the building or in the same space, you still feel that impact virtually. Queen Mother and all of those people, you know, it's still a moment. And so even when I had those chances to go on the campus for convocation, or even an intensive or what have you, just being on the grounds. And it was just special for me because I did it for me. You know, it was personal.
Yeah. John Kenny was the reason why I went to Virginia.
Wow.
I mean, he was still the dean when I went. Actually, he was the dean my whole time. He was the dean when I graduated. He retired a couple years later, but he wasn't even talking about retirement then. But he had that program in a way where people initially started going to Virginia Union because of John Kenny. Like, it was like, you need to go. Dean Kenny is the man, and he has crafted this experience with this weekend program. So you get the MDiv, and now you're almost at year 10. What do you think's next for you?
Man, so I'm trying to finish some things at the current assignment that I know I'm assigned to do. And we're doing great, you know, and just trying to make the necessary adjustments to this post-pandemic church, as we've talked about even off camera. Just trying to make the necessary adjustments to this post-pandemic church, chartering these uncharted territories, dealing with what seems like a new dispensation. You know, so trying to navigate through that. Also, man, still learning more things about myself. I think sometimes, again, and you know, because of what my life journey has been, I've spent a lot of time figuring out stuff for people. Not much figuring out some things for myself. So trying to now be more intentional about addressing my own struggles, battles, while still being in tune to the voice of God for his people. And then, you know, as we've spoken previously, just trying to now discern what's the next step, even in that education realm. Again, it's personal, and I want to, you know, I want to continue. But just trying to merge all that together, man. You know, seeing my raising children, my daughter, and most things, man, you know, the older you get, and then you got kids and you've raised them and you've seen things, you get a little bit more sensitive about stuff, right? So, man, I was looking at my daughter the other day. She'll be in middle school next year. So I'm just like, man, things are changing, right? Nothing stays the same, but just trying to embrace all of that.
All right. So as we close, look into your camera and give someone some words to live by who may be feeling the call as a kid, or is trying to navigate through the seasons of ministry from one call pastorate to the next, in those different groups, how they navigate from your journey.
So I would say to the person that's navigating the call as a child, if I can be transparent, especially for those who may have someone in their space that's able to protect them, but then for those who may not have someone in their space, I would encourage them to actually, while you're navigating through that, find an individual who does not seek to exploit who you are and what God has gifted you with. In a real sense, and I said it to you jokingly, but in a real sense, there can be some traumatic moments if you're not careful while trying to mature and while trying to embrace what God has given to you. And my thing to you is, for that child preacher or child prodigy, whatever the case may be, make sure it's God sending you into it and not somebody else. Because the worst thing you can do is get out on a journey that people put you on, because people don't last. But if God put you on it, God's word will always stand. For that pastor that's in transition, make sure you've completed everything God wants you to do where you are. I know sometimes it can be mind-boggling when you see everybody else moving and you're still sitting. But make sure you're completing everything that you can complete before you're thinking about, because all you'll do is you'll keep leaving from one place to the next with incomplete jobs done. So make sure you're completing the assignment and make sure you're going with God.
Man, thank you.
Yep.
Pastor Frank Harris, thank you.
Real and raw conversation.
Navigating the natural and theology, influencing people to find purpose and live with quality. We descended to Christ, just acknowledge me. The sacred scriptures tell us, throw down your nets, come and follow me. A leadership that's anointed and appointed. When leading God's people, sometimes you become disappointed. You do what you can, you do what you know. You give it to God and let it go, go, go.